If you're stuck in a dead-end job making under 60K a year and thinking about breaking into cybersecurity, the last thing you want is to look like an amateur when you finally get your shot. So maybe you're grinding through online courses, trying to teach yourself something like pen testing, but you're worried that when you actually get in front of an employer, you'll expose yourself as a fraud. Well, I've been working in pen testing for over a decade, and I've helped hundreds of people escape low-paying jobs for six-figure cybersecurity careers. And today, I'm gonna show you the 7 biggest mistakes that instantly scream beginner to hiring managers. Mistake number 7 is something that seems logical, but actually destroys your credibility before you even start. So if you're serious about landing that 100K a year remote cybersecurity role, keep watching. The first mistake that I typically see is what I call tool-driven testing over hypothesis-driven testing. So what that looks like is a lot of your new pen testers, they often start with the question of what tool should I run? They're very tool-centric instead of asking, what is the application trying to do? What were the developers thinking when they created this? And what might they not have thought about? What might they not have considered? The other thing is, with the tools, they'll blindly run scanners, things like crazy burp extensions or nuclei templates, and dump findings without understanding the root cause or exploitability. That is why a lot of times, a little interview tip for you guys, when you're on these interviews, they're going to be asking you those one layer deeper questions, right? You might know how to use a tool, but do you know how the tool works? Do you know why you're using that tool? That's what they're often trying to discern for this exact reason when you're in those interviews. So senior testers form a mental model of the systems first, and then they choose the tools surgically. And they're also very tool agnostic. They can weave in and out of the tools because they understand the underlying objective and like what is happening one layer deeper. So if you want to accelerate your timeline to getting, being able to talk one level deeper on this stuff and understanding cybersecurity at a deep level, not just, focusing on tools and knowing how to run tools, but actually knowing how to do the job in 6 months, then check the link down in the description below and you can talk to me directly and let's get you on the path. So the next mistake that I noticed these pen testers making are treating vulnerabilities as checkboxes rather than risk. So beginners love saying things like, hey, I found XSS, right? Alert 1 on the screen. We found SQL injection without explaining the impact. So they don't ask, okay, like what can this actually lead to? Like based on the application, like what is the ramifications? Because you got to think about it from a business perspective. The executives and stuff, they don't know what SQL injection is. So you can use all of your cybersecurity buzz terms. They're going to be left scratching their head and wondering like, should I care or should I not? So you need to be able to speak their language, speak the impact. What is the impact? What can an attacker do? And this is going to change based on the application. That's why it's so important to dive into the application specifically and trying to understand the environment that you're working in. A lot of times they don't ask things like, can this lead to account takeover or data exposure or maybe privilege escalation or lateral movement? Professionals will frame everything in a business and risk context and not just using, throwing out vulnerability names. So this next one is one that really irks a lot of people in cybersecurity. They really hate when they see people like this. But a common mistake is poor scoping discipline. And, it's very common for amateur pen testers to start testing out of scope hosts and going outside of scope because they really want to find that RCE. They really want to pop the shell and this and that, right? Or sometimes they will hammer production with a bunch of intrusive payloads or ignore rate limits or just use attacks, and they don't, kind of goes back to not knowing your tools and not knowing things one layer deeper. They might, kick off an attack that ends up actually doing some damage to the systems, like leaving a bunch of artifacts behind and stuff like this. And this shows a lack of respect for the rules of engagement and client safety, which can be a huge issue, obviously, especially if you're a contractor. And, good pen testers will treat scope like law and not just little guidelines that you can ignore or whatever. Yeah, this is something that it really goes hand in hand with having that understanding of what you're doing. In a lot of companies, the reason that you might have worked, for those of you that are pen testers that might be watching this video, if you ever worked at a company where everything was out of scope, like, oh, I'm not even allowed to get a shell on a box, or I'm not allowed to even really test for remote code execution beyond simple payload. that's the reason for it, is they had someone like this on the team that didn't understand the tools, that didn't understand the scope, and they like brought something down and their team got yelled at. And so now they're like really scared and really cautious. I remember that at my first job, everyone was like really, really scared. But it's like, if you understand like how this stuff works, you know, like what could potentially degrade performance on something and what wouldn't. And the next one is one that I've seen time and time again. It's weak or unreadable reporting. This is one of the biggest career killers, just straight up. So common issues include like, you know, copy pasted CWE text with no reproduction steps, or the reproduction steps are not very clear. They don't like have their screenshots annotated. The screenshots are blurry or whatever, and zero remediation guidance. You want a clean and concise reproducible report that, you know, that's way more valuable than even one extra finding or one extra bug. So if you want a good understanding of how to write a solid report, I have some videos on my channel where I broke that down. I'll put it in the cards now. I can't remember what the video is called off the top of my head, but I'll put it in the cards if you guys want to watch a video where I break down one of my own students' reports from a professional perspective and give them the full feedback of what I'm looking for, what makes a professional report. This next one goes hand in hand with a lot of the things that we've been talking about so far, but it's the over-reliance on automation and scanners. So new pen testers often assume that automation equals coverage. So they'll just trust the scanner blindly without actually validating the output. So like, for example, if the scanner, the burp scanner or whatever says there's SQL injection, they'll be like, oh, there was SQL injection, let me go report that. But any good pen testing team, they're not going to blindly trust those scanner results. They're going to go and manually validate it to make sure that it's not a false positive, because these scanners, they would rather show you it than miss it, right? They'd rather have what we call in the industry a false positive rather than a false negative, meaning there was an issue and it never found it in the first place. So they lean on the side of overly, you know, chatty. A lot of times they will show something that they think is an issue, but it's really not. It's a false positive if you dive into it. So you don't want to just rush out and start reporting that right away because the scanner said and treating that as law. You actually want to go and manually validate it to make sure before you report it. The other thing is, if you overly trust the scanner, you're going to miss entire classes of vulnerabilities, things that scanners are pretty much completely useless for detecting, things like logic flaws, even a lot of authorization bypass and different chaining attacks that you can do. The scanner is almost never going to do like chained attacks. Experienced pen testers will assume scanners are noisy assistants and not complete authorities. The next mistake is no attack chaining or escalation thinking. So beginners will stop at the first low severity finding, and they don't really think like, you know, what if I combine this IDOR with this, you know, weak password policy, what could I maybe do with that? And this is what really separates a senior pen tester from a junior pen tester, because a lot of the junior pen testers and, you know, even mid-level pen testers will just look at all the vulnerabilities in isolation rather than like taking time to step back and think, how can I maybe chain these together? And also, like we were discussing earlier, they might just find a vulnerability, stop there, where they might be able to go even deeper with that. And the deeper you can go with these findings, you're actually helping the company more, because believe you me, if an attacker finds this stuff, they're going to go as deep as possible with the findings. Like, how many times have we seen breaches that, you know, they started on like a little point of sale system and they pivoted through the entire company, compromised like the high up executives in the company, like stole all the data. And like, I'm not saying that you should like, you know, be exfiltrating data or anything like that, but you should be going, you know, relatively as far as you can within the scope, so they can really demonstrate impact, so that the company knows like, hey, this is what could actually happen. This is serious. We need to secure these security issues that we have out there. So that's how you're going to do that. Think about how you can chain things together. That can be some of the coolest findings that you ever get. Like, you know, for example, did you know that if you have cross-site scripting on a page, you can always also get cross-site request forgery, because you can use cross-site scripting to steal the CSRF token and pass the token and actually exploit, you know, get past the cross-site request token and forge requests. Did you know that? You can chain these vulnerabilities together as well. That could be really useful a lot of times. So number 7 is poor communication during the engagement. So amateur pen testers will either stay completely silent until the final delivery of the report, or they're going to spam clients with raw findings constantly. And so they don't know when to ask the clarifying questions. And most importantly, they don't know when to actually notify them of the vulnerabilities early. So there's cases where you want to actually do that. Like, for example, if you find like a really critical vulnerability, you need to drop everything and you need to notify the client immediately so that they can secure against it as quickly as possible if it's a very severe, like a critical rated finding. That's something that often gets overlooked by many beginner pen testers and amateurs. The senior pen testers, they will communicate like consultants and not like hackers in the basement. If you found this valuable and you want to take it a step further, you want to work with me directly to really accelerate your learning and just help you break into cybersecurity that much faster, then check the link down in the description below and book a call and we'll get you on the path.